I gotta admit, the end of the Fever Mercury game made me sit up for a second because it got a little spicy with Caitlyn Clark having an interaction with DeWAnna Bonner out on the middle of the floor, sort of waving her back to the bench. But that interaction stood out to me for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one, obviously, is the history there, where DeWAnna Bonner was on the Fever for a cup of coffee and then winds up on the Mercury. Before the season, Caitlyn Clark said she wanted to win a ring for her. Right? You know, like she said, I want to win for her. And Caitlyn Clark went out of her way to also, you know, shine light on how DeWAnna Bonner had risen up to the top of, you know, near the top of the all-time WNBA scoring ranks. And then...
You think that viral wave was just petty drama? It was not. It was a verdict months in the making. And tonight, we are laying out every receipt behind it. From whispered promises to a public gesture that stopped the internet. This is how a single flick of the wrist rewrote an entire narrative. If you enjoy deep dives that cut through the noise, make sure you subscribe right now and turn on notifications so you never miss the next breakdown. Let's roll. This was not a spicy exchange. It was a reckoning. The cameras caught Caitlyn Clark waving Dana Bonner back to the bench, and many called it petty theater. That read ignores the one thing that mattered. There was history and there was a promise. Bonner made a brief stop in Indiana, and Clark publicly said she wanted to win a ring for her, praised her rise near the all-time scoring ranks, and welcomed a veteran voice to a young core. That gentle storyline hit reality. We have to start right where the first crack began, with a burnt bridge nobody wanted to name. It did not chip, it shattered outright. The wave was not random attitude. It was the receipt. It was the gesture you make when a person who took your respect decides to perform toughness in front of the same bench she left behind. What looked like a flick of the wrist was the quiet end of a chapter that could have been a partnership. The moment was not heat, it was record-keeping in motion. ... A ledger line written in full view of the league and a crowd. This was loyalty answered with dismissal. To understand the revenge, you must see the setup. Bonner signed with Indiana as the perfect fit on paper. The poised mentor beside a phenom. Clark bought in completely, called out Bonner's legacy, and said plainly that she wanted to help her get the elusive ring. That was not flattery. It was a public stake in the ground, a risk to Clark's own reputation if things soured. After only 9 games, Bonner asked out, packed up, and left the team. Indiana lost a veteran voice overnight, and the sales pitch collapsed. Players change teams often. That is business. This was not business. This was a fracture that cut into the private space of a locker room and lingered. It took a public vow and made it look naive. The partnership dissolved before it could breathe, and the player who vouched the loudest looked exposed. That is the soil where anger takes root and waits for the day it can bloom in the open. Truly, the setup guaranteed a response. This was personal, not business. We only know the depth because Sophie Cunningham chose honesty on a podcast. She said there was no goodbye, no ping in the team group chat, not even a simple note. Just vanishing. It's one thing to haggle a deal, it's another to leave teammates staring at silence. Cunningham called it a little beef, which is diplomatic for a burned room. In a league built on trust, travel days, and film sessions, you do not ghost the roster that welcomed you. The effect is corrosive. It snips unseen threads that hold the season together and made routines feel fragile. Clark's public praise became vulnerable text on a timeline she could not delete. It turned a kind gesture into a liability and made every future handshake feel conditional. This is why the wave hurt so much. It was not about a single call or a single timeout. It was about a standard that had been broken in private and answered in public. Ghost in a locker room has a cost. The file was already open between them. The tension did not begin in Indiana. It reached back to last season's playoffs with Bonner in Connecticut. A hot possession, a no call, words traded, and a light push after contact. Moments like that hang in air like chalk dust. They settle into memory and wait. Clark is wired like a ledger. She longs the hit, the remark, the stare, and files them where they will be found when needed. Reputations are built in public, but scores are settled in sequence. Bonner's exit from the Fever did not start a feud. It accelerated one already humming beneath headlines. When the veteran role model became the player who walked away, The contrast sharpened everything. That's why the on-court encounter felt less like a surprise and more like an overdue entry. You cannot outrun the tape when the tape never forgets.
Just player on the damn team. I'm not just saying that just to say it. Lexi Hall stand on business when it's time to. Now, we all know that the Indiana Fever is trying to make a push for the playoffs. We've been getting mixed signals coming out about Caitlyn coming back, about Caitlyn being, somewhat ready to go. Then we got Stephanie White saying it's day-to-day again, basically. Well, I'm here to tell you, Caitlyn Clark is not shying away.
The past was present that night, and it had receipts. History was not background, it was motive. Game day made the stage, not the script. September 2nd, 2025, Fever versus Mercury. Clark had missed 19 straight with a groin injury. In street clothes, but locked in. During a timeout, Bonner walked toward her bench while lobbying the officials, and she did it in front of Indiana's row where Clark sat. The Mercury bench was steps away, the Fever seats closer, and the broadcast lens waited on the baseline. It looked like veteran venting, a puff of steam with no target. What it really was, intended or not, was the opening for a rebuttal months in the making. A star who could not check in could still check the narrative. Being sidelined is not the same as being silent when courtside mics are live. Street clothes read as neutral to viewers, but to veterans, they can signal freedom to speak without risking a tech. The arena provided lights, microphones, and angles. All that remained was timing, and Clark keeps time. The stage was set before the whistle blew. Confrontation does not need volume to land. Clark rose and met her at the edge of the paint. Courtside audio caught the spine of it. Not a foul. No speech, no spice. Just the same verdict in the same tone. Again, not a foul. The words were not shouted for effect. They were placed like citations. No wobble in the delivery, no flinch in the gaze, no wasted motion. She corrected the premise, dismantled the complaint, and refused the bait in one clean sequence. The injured star did not retreat. She authored the moment. That is how you win the frame without touching the ball. When anger expects noise, calm reads like proof. The energy tilted because certainty carries. The contrast did the work. Bonner's complaint began to sound like theater, and Clark's replies sounded like rulings. Each repetition stripped away the argument until only posture stayed. The room understood before the replay even rolled. The quiet part became the loudest sound. Then came the wave, simple and devastating. No shove, no jaw-to-jaw, no need for referees to step in. A small, sarcastic motion of the hand, a dismissal more cutting than contact. Back to your bench now. The message was layered. You left us, you disrespected me, and now you do not rate my time. That was not an outburst, it was punctuation. The kind of mark that ends a sentence and starts a headline. In a league that confuses scrums with strength, restraint became the sharpest blade. The camera angle made the gesture clean and inescapable. You cannot argue with a silhouette that clear to millions. The bench reacted with the certainty that only context provides. The crowd buzzed in that half second a building recognizes something definitive. It felt like a verdict read aloud, one motion, and the scoreboard stopped mattering. That is the art of symbolic dominance, the thing clips are built to carry. The wave said more than a monologue ever could. The aftermath proved the point in minutes. The Mercury won, and Bonner scored 19, but those facts dissolved in the feed. All that traveled was the wave. Captions wrote themselves, pressed, rattled, salty. The meme economy did what it does, and a gesture outpaced a box score line. Narrative gravity is not measured only in points. It's measured in symbols ordinary viewers can repeat without context. The wrist flick became the emblem of the night, and Bonner became the supporting character in Clark's scene. Highlights stitched the clip to every timeline that mattered. By morning, the discussion was not about defensive schemes or sets. It was about status and story, about who looked in control when it counted. That is how influence works in 2025. It expands the moment that most people can remember after 10 seconds and trims everything else. The result was simple and brutal. The internet ruled it a rout before the film session began. They tried checkers, she played chess. Opponents think they can rough Clark into silence, turn welcome to the league into routine body blows, and chirp her off center. They do not see what she does with it. Every bump becomes inventory. Every glare becomes a future clip. Every slight becomes an index card for later. Bonner leaned on veteran gravity. Clark inverted it, made experience look like inertia, and declined to grant the drama she wanted. There is a difference between noise and narrative. The loudest moment of the night was a quiet command. The message to the rest of the league was practical. If you want a scene, she will take the scene and remove your lines. That's why restraint can sting longer than contact. It keeps replaying clean. It travels without explanation, and it multiplies on loop. Veterans pride themselves on control. Clark made that pride look like a prop the director cut in editing. You cannot bully a player who owns the edit. Humiliation is not a stat, but it sticks. Bonner left the fever, ghosted the home, then postured in front of the same bench she had abandoned. The reply was a public reset with one motion. People will argue about tone. Some will say Clark should have taken the high road. The simpler truth is that justice can be elegant. Drawing a line without throwing a punch is still a line. Doing it from the sideline multiplies the effect. She authored a national moment in street clothes. That is power you rarely see in any league. The scoreboard clock ran, but the narrative clock stopped there. A single gesture froze the argument in assigned roles no press note could rewrite. It told the room who owed whom an apology and who had already moved on. That does not show up in a stat sheet, but it shows up in careers. Reputation is the league's longest season. Zoom out and the pattern looks familiar. Skewed whistles, hard welcomes that land like targeted tests. Veterans lining up to measure themselves by her gravity. They think they are pushing back a rookie. They're actually pressing against the cultural phenomenon that understands the second court. The one made of clips and captions. The modern game runs on hardwood and on timelines. Clark plays both with clarity, turning messy nights into simple stories most people can follow fast. That's not conspiracy, that's media literacy, a reality every team studies like weather. Dana Bonner was not the exception. She was the latest proof that public perception is its own scoreboard. You can win the box score and lose the frame. And if you lose the frame, you lose what fans remember. That's the quiet math of influence now. The league ignores that math at its own risk. One battle is not a season, and she knows it. Clark is still out, and more veterans will try to take their swing. The question is not whether the wave landed. It did. The question is what follows when the tape comes off and minutes return to her. If she can do this from a folding chair, what happens when the handle's back in her hands? Who's next, and who's ready for the weight of that answer? The search is on, and the list is not short at all. You can hear the subtext in every presser and see it in every scouting clip. Coaches will dare jumpers, defenders will test the hip, and the smartest will try to starve possessions. People are preparing for the version of Clark that remembers and forgets nothing. That is a long memory in a young career, and it puts the league on notice for the next meeting, the next switch, the next trap. The sequel writes itself, and the camera's already rolling. If this breakdown hit the mark for you, tap subscribe and drop a comment on what moment we should dissect next. Your support helps us bring sharper stories, faster. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.